So my next question would be how Ukraine political future will shape up, because the current battlefield realities definitely could spell trouble for the Ukrainian army as Russian army is encircling Pokrovsk. So how could how what do you think is the prediction for Zelensky's political future? Because I read so many articles stating that Yermak might be the man actually running the country. Zaluzhnyi might be brought in to become the next president. I would like to also get your assessment of how the ex-president Poroshenko might also, how his role might be in a post-war future, and if there is a peace deal, will the nationalists accept concessions like territorial loss, denazification, and official recognition of the Russian language and the church?
I think you've set the dilemmas up very well to be able to achieve all of those things which would be needed for a peace both with Ukraine and within Ukraine is nearly impossible, or at least very, very difficult to imagine. I'll tell you maybe some jokes, Ukrainian jokes. So about Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, it has been said that he's not the most important person in Ukraine, but he's not the second most important either. So it's not intimating that he might be when if he chooses to be. But Yermak has been the subject of media campaigns organized by Western governments to discredit him, at least to weaken his political position in Ukraine. Aside from that, among personalities who occasionally emerge in the Western press, I'm talking about Ukrainian political leaders, particularly military leaders, we also have Kirill Budanov. So Budanov is the head of the military intelligence service. And like everyone in the current Ukrainian government, he is obliged and has been obliged to sound an optimistic note. But as some Ukrainian observers have noted, he has recently chosen to be more pessimistic. And this could be part of a strategy by people at the very top to say, I'm not with these euphoric and unrealistic people currently in government who have led us to this disaster. I, for one, wish to take a different tack now and wish to argue that we do need negotiations. So that's interesting. But it is well known that Yermak is trying to get rid of Budanov, and Budanov doesn't like Yermak.
Yes.
And that's just one of an endless number of internal rivalries in Ukraine that always exist just beneath the surface, because people like the ones you've mentioned, Zaluzhnyi, Poroshenko, Tymoshenko, and others, are anticipating the next elections, the next presidential and then parliamentary elections. Now, that will only take place after the current state of martial law is lifted. But it has to be renewed every few months. So each one of those will be a test of the ability of the president to prevent his removal, Zelensky, to prevent his removal. Because or let's say conversely, the fact that we are seeing so much discussion in the Ukrainian alternative media, some of which is appearing in mainstream media outlets like Ukrainska Pravda, but mainly it remains in the large and widely read alternative media of Ukrainian politics, like Strana UA, and many of the bloggers who are outside of Ukraine now. So the fact that there is a debate within these alternative outlets suggests that people are trying to position themselves and garner the necessary support to launch their political campaigns as soon as it becomes obvious that martial law will be lifted, because the clock begins ticking for the next elections as soon as that occurs. Because as we know, elections have been suspended. They have been suspended. Whether or not this is legal would be a matter for the Constitutional Court, but the Constitutional Court has been suspended by President Zelenskyy. So it's a nice, tight circle. But at some point, at least now, most people assume that the state of martial law cannot exist forever. And therefore, that's why we see all this positioning by Poroshenko. These names, we mention them only because they've been mentioned already and are visible in the press. But I don't think that the list of candidates who might emerge are limited to them. And I have a difficult time personally seeing Petro Poroshenko, the former president, as a viable candidate, or Yulia Tymoshenko as a viable candidate, or most any political figure from Western Ukraine, which is where the nationalist base is. But the hardcore nationalists, so the militant nationalists, do not trust the political leaders in Western Ukraine because they're not fighting. They have essentially found a way to avoid combat by being politicians or judges or mayors or things like that. So they don't value, though, that kind of contribution to the war effort as much as military credentials. It will remain to be seen when peace erupts, when the fighting stops and there's a peace settlement, what the value of a military pedigree will be. Because one can look at the history of military conflicts and post-war conflicts, and one sees two patterns emerge. One is, in the event of our victory, our glorious heroes are rewarded, and the top leaders of our successful effort are popular. Of course, they do need to change their rhetoric. They have to show that they can be peacetime leaders as well. So not everyone can do that. But there have been a few cases, most notably Dwight Eisenhower, Charles de Gaulle in France, Dwight Eisenhower in the United States, where they have been able to do that. Although not many, when you think about the vast history. There's also, going back further to the American Civil War, General Ulysses S. Grant. Of course, they didn't move directly in these cases from their military experience into their civilian experience. In most cases, they took some time off to work in the public sphere, to be, in the case of Eisenhower, president of the University of Columbia University, and other things. But there is that transition. However, very often there's a second strand, or second alternative approach, and that is people are so tired of war and disgusted with war that they don't want to have anything from anybody who is involved in the war leading them again. And they turned sharply toward peace candidates. This occurred with the removal of Winston Churchill after World War II. So it's hard to know which track Ukraine will take. The added difficulty in knowing is that the far right occupies a unique position in European politics generally, but even more so in Ukrainian politics. In Ukrainian politics, it is a militarized brotherhood that defines itself as above the political system and as more than a political party. It is a mission. It is a cause. They're like warrior monks, if you will, who are fighting not for this cause, not for that reform, not for this, but for the sacred cause of a Ukrainianized Ukraine, of a racially, culturally, politically, linguistically, and religiously pure Ukraine, free from the influence of Russians, Poles, the historical enemy, Jews, and Western liberal riffraff, who, by introducing their reforms and their ties, their attempts to tie down the natural vital growth of the Ukrainian nation, would be infecting and tearing down the dream of a greater Ukraine. Well, this is, of course, the dream of the 1930s, of the original founders of the Ukrainian national movement that carried forward in the post-war period after World War II, and is very popular, has been, I should say, very popular among Ukrainian youth. I don't think these ideas are at all popular in the Ukrainian population, but the Ukrainian population is not well informed about them. The average Ukrainian probably just wants, like anyone would want, the war to end and for life to return to normalcy so that the electricity could run on time and the water could, flow freely again. And, there wouldn't be all these exorbitant payments, and the state would, not be rounding up people off the streets to send them to the front. All of that would be a good thing if it could be achieved. But the Ukrainian government is not keen to end the war because the current the current martial law situation gives it total power within the political system. It's true that power is not always visibly exercised. So Ukraine's supporters in the West can still refer to it, probably inaccurately, as a democracy of some sort. But when the government wants to, when they simply disbanded the anti-corruption units, prohibited them, transferred all of their functions to the government prosecutor, what would be in the United States, the Attorney General, the government's the state prosecutor, and who is appointed by Zelensky and does Zelensky's bidding, all of that could occur within 24 hours. Poof, it's done. But there was a pushback organized by the West to rally and push both internal dissent and also the really meaningful threat of cutting off Western assistance to Ukraine. Not just American, but especially European, the sole font now. Which leads me to an interesting conclusion, that if the West, elites in the West, were ever to decide seriously that they wanted to achieve peace in Ukraine quickly, we now know, we have a demonstration of what would work. That is to apply the same sort of economic pressure that was applied in the salvation of these anti-corruption agencies, which are thoroughly run and managed by the West in Ukraine. But to do that with respect to military and economic assistance. And the experience of the last 2 weeks suggests that this would be a very effective and rapid way to end the war.
It remains to be seen what political future and economic future holds for Ukraine, Professor.